Your jailbroken Nintendo Wii has a hidden superpower. I'll show you everything it takes step by step to set up RetroArch on your Nintendo Wii so you can start playing 74 different game systems on it in no time at all. Fire up your Nintendo Wii and your PC. We're about to level up your setup. Along with your Nintendo Wii and your computer, you'll need the SD card from your Nintendo Wii. It should already be formatted in FAT32 format. First step towards retro gaming greatness on your Wii, download RetroArch from the official RetroArch website. I have it linked for you in the video description. On the downloads page, scroll down until you see the listing for the Nintendo consoles. The Nintendo Wii will be all the way over to the right hand side. Go underneath the Wii logo and click to download the 7Z file to your computer. Let's get that 7Z file uncompressed. Open up a new instance of File Explorer in Windows and then navigate to your Downloads folder. You'll see the RetroArch.7Z file here. You'll need a tool to extract it as Windows does not natively extract 7Z files. I'm using an open source program called Zipware here, and I've got that linked for you in the video description in case you need it. You can extract this file to its default location on your computer. Once the file's extracted, you no longer need it. Right-click on it and click Delete to send it to your recycle bin. And remember, items that you delete and send to your recycle bin are still archived there for you just in case you need them. Navigate to the newly uncompressed RetroArch folder and double-click into it. You'll see a subfolder in here called Apps. Take this File Explorer window and snap it into place on the left side of the screen. You'll need to copy that Apps folder over to the SD card on your Nintendo Wii. Remove the SD card from your Wii and put it into an SD card reader on your computer. When your computer recognizes your SD card and opens up a new File Explorer window, grab that window and drag and drop it to snap it into place over on the right side of the screen. Before you copy anything over, you want to make sure that you do not copy this apps folder into one of these subfolders. The best way to do that is just scroll down until all of the subfolders are out of the way and you only see files on the root of the SD card. This will stop you from accidentally dragging and dropping apps to the wrong place. Now you can just grab that apps folder and drag and drop it right on the root of your Wii's SD card. Quality SD cards are important because they save you a lot of time when you're copying over large volumes of games. I have my recommendations for some great SD cards linked for you in the video description. Once the apps folder's been copied over to your SD card, you don't need the RetroArch folder any longer. You can go back to the root of downloads, right-click on the folder, and delete it to send it to the recycle bin. Let's get your game content copied over to the root of your SD card. Once again, I recommend that you go over to the root of the SD card and scroll out of the way of any subfolders on your SD card. This will make sure you copy the game content over to the right place on your SD card. I have game content and system BIOS content pre-staged in a folder on my computer called Demo. I have the system BIOS file stored in a folder called BIOS and the game file stored in a folder called Games. I know, inspired choices, right? Inside the BIOS folder, I've got some uncompressed BIOS files to run some of the emulator cores that require the system BIOS files. And inside the Games folder, I have some game files sorted by console name. Inside the subfolders for the consoles, I have game files stored here in .zip format. This worked for me, but you can set up your game files and folders in any way that works best for you. Once you have your game folders and files set up, you can select the folders and drag and drop everything right onto the root of your SD card. That's everything you need to do with your PC. You can transfer over to your Nintendo Wii for the remainder of the guide. Remove the SD card from your computer, insert it into your Nintendo Wii, and power on your system. From the main menu of your system, use the Wiimote to navigate to the listing that says Homebrew Channel. Select it with the A button, then select Start in the bottom right corner to launch the Homebrew channel. From the main menu of the Homebrew channel, you should now see RetroArch as one of your choices. Navigate to it using the Wiimote, then select it with the A button. From the menu choices that appear at the bottom, hover over Load with the pointer and select it with the A button to launch RetroArch for the first time. For the remainder of this guide, rotate your Wiimote to its horizontal orientation. From the main menu of RetroArch, you'll need to tell it where your system BIOS and game files are located. To do this, use the D-pad to move the highlight down to the listing for Settings and press the 2 button on the Wiimote. Inside the Settings submenu, use the D-pad to scroll the highlight down near the bottom until you see the listing that says Directory. Select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. Take a look at the top of the screen here. You'll see a listing called System BIOS and there's a pre-configured directory here. You'll need to change this. Select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. The first listing inside these options is for SD. That's for your SD card. It should already be highlighted, so select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. This right here is why it makes sense to copy your System BIOS Files folder and your Games folder right on the root of the SD card. Super easy to get to. From here, scroll down to BIOS or whatever folder you named them and select it with the number 2 button. Then scroll down to the listing that says Use this directory and select it with 2 on the Wiimote. This will lock in the change for you. RetroArch knows where to find your System BIOS files, but it also needs to know where to find your game files. To set this correctly, use the D-pad to move the highlight arrow down to the listing that says Downloads. Yeah, I know there's nothing being downloaded here, but that's where it's going to look for your game content. So to do this, use the D-pad to move the highlight down to Downloads and select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. Once again, you'll be prompted for the location where your content is. And once again, SD card will be the first listing here. Select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. Then you can scroll down to the listing that has your games in it. In this case, I have them in a folder called Games, conveniently enough, so I'm going to scroll down with the D-pad to Games and select it with the 2 button. Just like you did with your System BIOS files, you'll need to lock in this change. To do it, scroll down with the D-pad to the listing that says Use this directory and select Use this directory with the 2 button on the Wiimote. With these changes dialed in, press the 1 button on the Wiimote twice. Once to go back 1 level in the settings menu, and once again to go back to the main menu of RetroArch. You'll need to save these configuration changes so RetroArch will use them each time you boot the program. To do this, move the highlight down with the D-pad until you get to the listing that says Configuration File, and select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. Inside this submenu, you'll see several listings, including one that says Save Current Configuration. Scroll down to this listing with the D-pad and select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. You won't see any change on the screen, but don't worry, it did save your configuration file. Just press the number 1 button on the Wiimote to go back to the main menu of RetroArch. There are 2 types of systems to emulate inside RetroArch, ones that need the System BIOS files and the ones that don't. Let's start with the ones that don't need System BIOS files just to make sure things are working correctly. Use the D-pad to move the highlight up to the listing that says Load Content and select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. From here, scroll down to the listing that says Downloads with the D-pad and select it with the 2 button. Remember how we set up this path earlier? This is pretty much the quickest way to get right into your content. I'll start by testing a Game Boy game since they don't require System BIOS files to run. And what's even cooler about this is that I made this game and you can have it for free. It's called Ravenscore and it's a shoot 'em up that has 8 levels, an original music soundtrack, and even boss battles along the way. To launch a game, go down to the .zip file and select it with the 2 button. Then scroll down to the listing that says Load Archive and select Load Archive with the 2 button. You'll be asked to choose a core, which is basically like an emulator, to launch the game. As this is a Game Boy game that's compatible with Game Boy, Game Boy Color, and Game Boy Advance, I'm going to scroll down through the listings here to Nintendo and pick one of these cores. In this case, the VBA core for Game Boy Advance works really well with this game. Select the core of your choice and press the 2 button on the Wiimote. And just like that, you'll be playing an original homebrew game through emulation and on your way to saving the galaxy from the forces of evil. Here's a pro tip. Press the home button on the Wiimote to pull up the RetroArch main menu for in-game play. From here, you can scroll down with the D-pad to select items like Saving State to mark your place in a game to come back to, or close out the content by navigating to Close Content and pressing the 2 button on the Wiimote. Let's make sure that RetroArch is reading the System BIOS files properly. To do this, scroll down to Load Content and select it with the 2 button on the Wiimote. Just like before, you'll be presented with the locations you can load content from. Downloads it is, scroll down to Downloads and press the 2 button. This time I'm going to load an Atari Lynx game because they require System BIOS files in order to launch properly. So I'll scroll down to Atari Lynx and select it with 2. I dig the game California Games for the Lynx, so I've selected it here for this demo. Choose the game that you want to launch with the 2 button, then just like before, scroll down to Load Archive and select it with 2. Again, you'll need to select the emulation core that you want to use to launch your content. In this case, I'm going to use the Atari Lynx Core Beetle because it works really well with California Games. And sure enough, the games load and play just fine. And let me say, there's nothing quite like the thrill of playing this game and getting a quadruple 360. Do you still need to jailbreak your Nintendo Wii system? Check this out. I've got a video that shows you how to do this step by step linked for you in the video description and pinned comment. I can't wait to see you over there in that video.